Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Today is, of course, Orange Shirt Day, marking Canada's shameful residential school legacy. But it's also the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. A solemn ceremony was held in Gatineau, Quebec, where some of the thousands of children who died in residential schools were finally named and remembered. The event was organized by the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation and APTN. Annette Francis brings us this from the Canadian Museum of History.
The event began with a grand entry, an opening prayer, and then came the speeches.
I evoke the ancestors to join us in this momentous occasion. And I know that the angels in heaven, the names that are on that list, are certainly smiling down on you and me.
And performances. The ceremony honors and remembers the Indigenous children who passed away in residential schools. It's in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action 72. The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation has been working to establish a national memorial for students who never returned home. Following the speeches came the unveiling of a 50-meter-long ceremonial cloth with 2,800 names of children who died and the schools they attended. Residential school survivor Ted Quaysance says it was a moving ceremony.
Very emotional. A lot of triggers. It's what we endured as survivors. You know, we're still here, and but could you imagine what the missing children, what they endured? And we don't know. But it's something that's that we must never ever forget.
Rye Moran says there's still a lot of records to collect and many more students to find.
Right now we have well over 2,000 children named on the list. There's another 1,600 students approximately that we know they passed away, but we don't know their names yet. And even as we went back into the records here recently and did some really what amounts to additional preliminary research, we found another 400 students relatively quickly. According
to Moran, the memorial cloth will go back to the National Centre for Reconciliation to be part of the collection of sacred objects. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Gatineau.
We always want to hear what you think. Here's how you can continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can find us online at aptnnews.ca, and you can find us on youtube.com/aptnnews. You can also follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more Indigenous news. Researchers are calling on those who lost loved ones to domestic homicide to come forward in a national study. In the Northwest Territories, advocates and experts say the numbers are among some of the highest in the country. Our reporter Charlotte Mort-Jacobs looked into that story.
It's no secret that the North has some of the highest rates of intimate partner violence in the country. In the Northwest Territories, 7 people died as a result of domestic homicide between 2010 and 2015. This week, researchers from the Canadian Domestic Homicide Prevention Initiative launched the third and final phase of a national study. Over the next 6 months, they will interview members and friends of lost loved ones, as well as survivors of severe domestic violence.
People can get screened in. I can describe what the study is about to them and make sure that, yes, they want to do this. There is, people can have a choice of a face-to-face interview. They can have a video online interview.
Dr. Patrice Moffat is the pan-territorial coordinator of the new project. She says the information collection from families will help inform frontline workers.
And we know that safety plans need to be ongoing because people's lives change, and so people have to renew their safety plans, and we need to find out in terms of domestic homicide.
Trends and patterns in the study show that Indigenous people represent 12% of all domestic homicide victims. Indigenous victims were also younger compared to any other group, with 1 in 5 being 24 years old and younger. Dr. Moffat says while the study began before the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, that they have gained insight on the complexities of women fleeing violence in the North.
We've had a graduate student in Western who actually took the report and pulled out all of the things from the report, all the calls to action. And this study itself, if you look at the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation, one of their calls, I've got the numbers somewhere here, was that we collect data and that we understand what's going on in Canada. Here in the territory.
Interviews can take place in communities, or families can be flown down to Yellowknife, and aftercare plans will be in place for those involved. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
It's time for us to take a short break, but we've got more news ahead, including what the Inuit are looking for in the upcoming federal election. And here's tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting off on the east coast, we've got 9 and rain in St. John's, 14 and mostly sunny in Halifax. Happy Valley Goose Bay is mix of sun and cloud and 8 degrees, mix of sun and cloud in La Grande River and 7. Quebec City is 13 and rain, 19 and rain in Montreal. Toronto will be 28 and rain, 23 and cloudy in Ottawa. Kapuskasing 10 and rain, 4 and rain in Big Trout Lake. Puckatawagan will be 5, mostly sunny, 5 in Churchill as well. 6 in a mix of sun and cloud in Gimli, 7 in a mix of sun and cloud in Winnipeg. Mix of sun and cloud in 3 in Swift Current, 5 for Regina, 5 for Saskatoon. 9s for Uranium City and Stony Rapids, 7 and sunny in L'Orange. Welcome back. A few weeks ago, the Assembly of First Nations unveiled its priorities in this upcoming federal election. Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami has come out with a list of their own, outlining what's important to Inuit. ITK President Natan Obed joined APTN's Dennis Ward to share that list.
President Obed, appreciate you taking some time for us. You have a list of 9 priorities with the suicide crisis, housing, and climate change at the top. How are they chosen and do they relate to one another?
The election priorities that we've put forward are consistent with the work that we've been doing not only at ITK, but also in partnership with the federal government over the last 4 years. A lot of our priorities are shared priorities between the Government of Canada and Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami and have been created through the Inuit Crown partnership process. So what we want to continue to work on is not only the reconciliation-based Inuit Crown partnership renewal, but then also the priority areas that we have identified and have been working on to date, and doing more in regards to action so as to better serve Inuit across Inuit Nunangat and across Canada.
Is there a party that has a platform on climate change that you would say has the best way of dealing with the climate crisis?
We've heard from each party, especially around climate, and of course the Green Party has been almost a one-issue party for a number of years, and so what their leader Elizabeth May has said about climate does resonate, especially in the urgency of her message. The Liberal platform in relation to climate, also with the zero net emissions by 2050, is a positive step forward, and the ambition to implement the Paris Agreement here in Canada are welcome planks in the platform. We do have concerns about undoing some of the work that's been happening over the past number of years in relation to climate action, and so I would leave it at that for other parties.
First Nations and Métis organizations seem relatively satisfied with the direction the Liberal government has gone in legislation and funding. How does ITK feel about the Liberals' track record?
the Liberals came in promising a renewed relationship. And right out of the bat, I can say that we have been able to have a relationship with the Prime Minister and with ministers in a way that Inuit had never had at the federal level with any previous government. The access that we had to ministers and to the Prime Minister was unprecedented. The work that we did together, the work that is still left undone, is another story. And we have had some amazing successes, some great investments over the past 4 years, but a lot of challenges along the way as well. But that's not to undermine the good work, especially in relation to tuberculosis and the ambition of the federal government to eliminate tuberculosis by 2030, or the apologies for residential schools in Nunatsiavut, or the relocation of the Ahirmut in Nunavut, or the treatment of TB across Inuit Nunangat during the 1950s and 60s. So there were a number of things that happened that Inuit have waited a long time for and were partnership with the federal government in undertaking. There's also a number of things like the language legislation that was unfortunate the way in which it turned out.
AFN National Chief Perry Bellegarde has said he'll work with whoever becomes Prime Minister. Is that the same for yourself, or have you a preference?
We are not partisan in our organization, and so Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami will work with whatever government is formed. I do hope that no matter what government is formed, that reconciliation and the urgency around improving socioeconomic status, implementing land claims, respecting Inuit and Indigenous peoples' rights is at the heart of any mandate of any government that's formed.
President Obed, Inuit make up a very small portion of Canada's voting population, but also occupy 4 vast ridings across the north. Why should federal leaders work for the Inuit vote?
That's a good question. What we don't have in are the size of our population. We make up for with the vast space in which we occupy and the rights that we have and the powers that we now have within those spaces. So Inuit Nunangat makes up 1/3 of Canada's landmass and 50% of its coastline. A lot of the conversations that are happening in this country around sovereignty, around climate change, around shipping, the Arctic and Inuit Nunangat will play a central role in the way Canada responds to and takes advantage of any opportunities in the 21st century, but also has an obligation to uphold the rights of Inuit within those spaces. So for the clout that we might have moving forward, it's a combination of the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Constitution, our land claim agreements, and then the very real political clout that we have through Inuit unity and through Inuit Nunangat land claim regions that make Inuit a population that should be considered with any national federal platform.
President Obed, we'll have to leave it there. Good to see you. Appreciate you taking some time for us.
Great to see you as well. Absolutely.
Since the federal election campaign began, 40 First Nations, Métis and Inuit candidates of all political stripes have been out pounding the pavement, rallying support. APTN has been profiling some running in ridings to watch. Annette Francis caught up with one of them in Ontario.
Hi. I got here as soon as I could, Tricia.
This campaign office in Bracebridge, Ontario is usually bustling with volunteers, but tonight everyone has headed to the All Candidates Forum. Tricia Cowie is running for the Liberal Party in the Parry Sound Muskoka riding. It's a large area, over 14,000 square kilometers, and home to 7 First Nations.
We can't cover a whole town in a day. Some of the smaller communities, so my community is Port Carling.
Cowie is a successful lawyer and member of Hiawatha First Nation, an advocate for Indigenous rights. She says she has met with many leaders to hear their concerns.
Actually, I did just meet with a number of chiefs yesterday, and the child welfare ruling is top of mind. But then there's also more practical, everyday decisions. So roadways are a big one. or bridges, for example. And then financing certification, that's really important.
Some Indigenous groups have lost confidence with the Liberals over the ongoing child welfare issues, suicides, and the water crises. But Cowie sees things differently.
As a First Nation person, I know that if we don't have a seat at the table, then we're probably on the menu. We need somebody there every day bringing this issue in every conversation, in every caucus meeting, to push forward for change.
This isn't her first run for the Liberals. In the last election, she lost by 2,200 votes to Conservative candidate Tony Clement. But he's not seeking re-election. Joy Lewis believes Cowie will do well this time around. That's why she came to show her support.
She's so well qualified. She's, first of all, she's Indigenous. She's a lawyer. She has a small business. And she knows all about the things that the Liberal Party has done in the last 4 years for Parry Sound and Muskoka.
Liberals asked about the economy, the environment, gun control, and the SNC Lavalin scandal. When the pressure was on, Cowie was quick to respond.
I just find it hard to understand how anybody can run for the Liberal candidate in any riding across Canada with Trudeau as the Prime Minister and the head of the party.
In 2015, the number one issue I was hearing out the door was the economy. You know how many times I've heard about that this time around? 0.
With less than a month away from election date, Cowie says she's confident and she'll keep pushing for support. Anna Francis, APTN National News, Bracebridge.
To Alberta now. More than a dozen companies looking for workers, mostly in the oil and gas industry, headed to the Montana First Nation, who hosted a job fair. APTN's Chris Stewart talked to some in attendance.
Lots of members from Montana and the nearby nations attended the Career and Employment Trade Fair. Companies from the oil and gas industry, agriculture, and more were here in Montana First Nation because they have a need: good workers.
We need laborers, and we have lots of jobs. So this is very exciting for us to kind of showcase our company to the members of the nation, and to hopefully kind of have a pipeline where we can provide jobs and have good employees and assets in our company as well.
Chief Leonard, standing on the road, says the people in Montana would be a good fit.
We have a lot of graduates now that are kind of pondering what kind of career they want to get into, and this is an example of what they can get into. So it's really exciting time for this community.
Vicki Weechie is the Executive Director of the Agamic Development Society for Montana. She says there are many different trades here looking for workers.
We have a lot of environmental company, engineering company, Ridgeline, who does reclamation remediation. So it's not just all pipeline, it's other industries that are related to or do other services that can be used with First Nations and then other communities.
The people APTN spoke to are hoping to work in oil and gas.
Actually, I've been looking towards oil and gas because it's a booming business. It's not going to go anywhere soon. It's going to probably be around as long as they can.
I can see myself getting into the welding or the pipe fitting. I have a bit of experience and education background in that. Laborer. That's easy for me, so I can do that.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Montana First Nation.
We need to take another quick break, and here's the rest of tomorrow's weather. Off to northern Alberta. We've got 12 and sunny and high level, 9 and sunshine in Fort McMurray, 9 and sunny in Edmonton, 6 and sunshine for Calgary. Cornell will be 15 and sunny, 15s for Vancouver and Victoria as well. Days Lake will be rainy, 12 degrees, 13 in Prince George. Dawson City will be rainy, 9 degrees, 9 in rain in Watson Lake. 14 in rain in Norman Wells, Wrigley 12 and mostly sunny. Tuck is 5 in rain, Paulatuck mix of sun and cloud and 5. 4 in snow in Cambridge Bay, 4 in sunshine in Baker Lake, Chesterfield and Whale Cove. 3, and some snow in Clyde River. 5, and mostly sunny in Pangertung, and 3 with a mix of sun and cloud in Iqaluit. Welcome back. A book on the history of northern radio airwaves in Saskatchewan has recently been published, and part of that past has a connection to APTN. Here's Priscilla Wolf with more.
Deborah Charles is the CEO of Mississippi Broadcasting Corporation, also known as NBC. The radio station has served First Nations and Métis communities in Saskatchewan for over 30 years. She recently released a book telling the story of NBC.
It's a history and pictorial book. I've been working on it for a couple years, and it's 136 pages. It talks about the whole history and evolution of Mississippi Broadcasting, its partners and its alliances.
NBC now has over 170,000 listeners and incorporates Cree, Dene, Michif, some Soto and Assiniboine languages in their programming. Napoleon Gardner, a former CEO of NBC, says the book highlights the history of not only NBC, but of the evolution of Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit communications.
What we did, like NBC, like APTN, like TVNC, like all of the communication societies across the province, across the country, it was us that did it, right? Indigenous people. And that's a significant fact, and it really is important. Prior to that, it was non-Indigenous media, non-Indigenous radio and television, providing a perspective from their view.
NBC is also a founding member of the Aboriginal People's Television Network, an important part of history that is noted in the book. Titled NBC, History Pictorial Book Recognizing Our Roots Way Beyond Just Broadcasting.
It's a piece in time. It's a beautiful thing, right? I mean, I'm sure there'll be another one. If we keep on moving, there'll be another book, another document, another perspective. And I want to say one thing that's clear is people. Every bit of NBC is us. You know, every one of us that have gone through there to work there, we wouldn't be doing anything if it wasn't them supporting us.
Charles, who's also an APTN board member, said telling the story from her perspective was an important task and a personal journey.
I wanted to do it because if I ever left, it's my masterpiece, it's my legacy, and people needed to know whether new staff, current staff, the real history, the real deep, rich history of how we evolve.
She raised the money to publish her book through investors and will be selling it at NBC offices in La Ronge and Prince Albert. NBC's Cree and Dene programming is nationally recognized as leading the field in Indigenous communications and is now heard on over 870 communities. Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Prince Albert.
We are all out of time for your news tonight. You can get the APTN News app on your phone if you've missed anything over the past few days. And be sure to check out an Orange Shirt Day story on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Melissa Ridge, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.